and thanks for your patience. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the traditional lands known as Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Nakaway, Nahaye, and Nakota nations, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Not sure if we've got any announcements or whatever, but we'll maybe leave those to the end if anybody has any questions or comments for me. We can do that at the end. So tonight's topic is organic and ecological gardening with nature, presented by Phil Johnson. Phil is a certified organic master gardener and accredited organic urban land care practitioner and a new member of Nature Regina. He has 4 decades of experience as a gardener, designing and digging, planting and picking. He assists homeowners and community groups to design and plant their gardens and green spaces with nature in mind. His current projects include the design and planting of the expanded Peace Garden at Knox Metropolitan United Church, and along with the Nature Regina Group, the creation of food forests and a pollinator corridor in Regina. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Elaine. Try to change my picture here. Oops, got another glitch. For some reason, I can't move my slide. You don't want to look at this all night. The title. So what the heck has happened here?
If you click on your presentation, Phil, and try then clicking.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, okay. Right, okay. Good, okay, that made it work. Thank you, whoever said that. So thanks, Elaine, and thanks everybody for making the effort to get back in and hear what I have to say tonight. I'm very happy to be able to speak to Nature Regina and talk about my current passion and or obsession with creating ecological gardens here in the city of Regina. And so I thought I'd start off with this slide here. This is most of the photos that you'll see in this presentation are from my own yard here, and they're photos that either I have taken or my wife has taken or a friend has taken. And this one is of a bumblebee in a scarlet runner bean, and it's pollinating it. And I thought that this would be a good picture to start it off with because it brings a number of things together in the garden and a number of the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight. So, and one of those is the importance of the pollinators and the importance of the insects. Now, the bumblebees are one of the world's top pollinators. Honeybees get all the credit, but bumblebees really do the work. The thing with honeybees is that there's a lot more of them in a colony. But the bumblebees are extremely valuable as pollinators, and unfortunately their numbers seem to be declining around the world. And there are kinds of bumblebees in Europe, for example, that have disappeared. And there's other types of bumblebees in North America that they think may be extinct, may have gone extinct. And so the question is, one of the questions is, why is that happening? And one of the main reasons, well, the climate change is a big part of it, but it's also habitat and the loss of habitat and the loss of places for bumblebees to ply their trade and for them to live and have their nests and raise their young. And so I'm thinking that one of the things that we can do as urban gardeners, or as if some of you are in the rural areas, is that if we make the habitat, improve the habitat, they will come back. And I've been working on this sort of thing in my own yard for the last probably 5 years, converting a lot of the plants over to native plants and making sure that I've got plants that will flower from spring through fall. And with the express purpose of trying to encourage the pollinators. And I think that I've had quite a lot of success here. I also have honeybees. They have 3 colonies of honeybees. And I guess we can thank the honeybees, well, not only for their honey, but for the fact that it was their plight that made people become aware of the plight with wild bees. But not just were honeybees declining in numbers, having colony collapse, but the numbers of wild bees were also being reduced. And so people started to think about that and started to try to track the numbers. And it's a very difficult job to try to track the numbers of bees. But anyway, the bumblebee is a good symbol here. Their numbers are declining. They're in some kind of trouble. And yet they're extremely valuable to us. And as I go through the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about why they and the other pollinators are so valuable. And yes, this is going to be a gardening talk, so I will eventually be talking about food as well as what some garden speakers will call ornamentals, but I just call habitat. So gardening with nature, what all does that mean? So as I said, I'm going to be talking about food production, that's vegetables, herbs, fruit, ornamentals, or what I want to call the habitat garden, because ornamental just implies the wrong thing, that it's just something to look at. And so I think a habitat garden as my preference, and flowers, grasses, shrubs, trees. We'll be talking about insects, the pollinators, the decomposers, the shredders, the predators, and it's the little things that run the world. And some of you will be familiar with the writings of E.O. Wilson, and he's the one that described insects that way, in that without insects, probably the human race would die off within, I think within 30 days, he said. It wouldn't be long anyway. So they're essential if we want to look at it from our perspective as humans, then they're essential for us. But you know, they pollinate most of the flowering plants in the world, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But so then also birds, they spread seeds, they eat insects. So those insects that I'm going to be talking about, trying to encourage to come into the yard. It's all a ploy by the birds. It's so that they've got something more to eat. And I'm exaggerating there. But of course, the birds sing in the morning. And I'm also going to talk about microbes. And I give quite a number of gardening talks, and I have done so over the last few years. And I maybe spend too much time talking about the microbes in the soil, but they are absolutely essential. A lot of people don't know about them and what they do. So I'm going to talk a wee bit about them here too. So what I'm talking about also is that we need a change in perspective and method. So this is a different way of looking at gardening, and it shouldn't seem too foreign to people now, because this kind of mind shift has been happening over probably the last 10 or 15 years. And some people thought this way 50 years ago or longer. But the idea now is to get away, or at least in this style of gardening, to get away from the chemical quick fix thinking. That means spraying every bug that you see in the yard and thinking that it's going to decimate your entire tomato crop if you see one hornworm in there. And so we're moving away from that, moving away from chemical fertilizers, moving away from the chemical quick fix. And we'll be talking about getting a better understanding of the ecological functioning in our yards. So the focus will be on the function of the plants, as opposed to how ornamental they might be, or what your production might be in your tomato patch. Although everything I'm talking about will also make for a more beautiful yard, and it will increase the health and the production of tomatoes, for that matter. So it's the whole range of arthropods and insects, spiders, earthworms, birds, bats, bacteria, fungi. They're all essential in growing healthy plants, and that includes healthy food and in controlling garden pests. And if you've got all the insects and the birds on your side, then you don't need to use the nasty pesticides to get rid of the pests in your garden. The insects will do it for you, and so will birds. So the trade-off here is that you have to accept some chewing. The insects, some of the insects that you're inviting into the yard are going to be predators, and they need something to eat. And so they're going to be mostly eating caterpillars or other insects. And so if there's no food for them, they're not going to stick around. So you entice them in with nectar, and you make them stay, because there will be a few caterpillars around that they could probably lay their eggs in, on, or nearby. So my line here is because everybody knows about the monarch butterflies and their fact that their caterpillars can only live on milkweed. So don't kill that one monarch caterpillar that happens to be chewing your milkweed. But it goes a lot further than that. This is I was sitting on my deck one day last year, and I saw these. What I saw were was the frass, those 4 dark pieces on the deck floor, and I wondered where that was coming from, because it just was so odd that it was sitting there like that. I didn't know that it was frass. And there's a Virginia creeper vine climbing up the side of the deck, and I looked more closely to see what might be doing that, and I found this sphinx moth larva. And they're huge. And I've only ever seen a few of them, and that just recently. And they're very slow moving, and they just chomp away on your Virginia creeper. So they take a few pieces. If you can see in this picture, right near the front, top front, it's kind of blurred, but that looks like the kind of bite that they would have taken out of the leaf. So it's not going to hurt the Virginia creeper unless there are lots of them. And that's just not going to be the case if you've got a yard where you've got predators that are looking for caterpillars like this, and they'll eat them, or they'll lay their eggs on them or around them, so that the larvae can then eat them. So this is what you get if you let that larvae grow into an adult. You get a sphinx moth. And there's something that people sometimes confuse with a hummingbird. They're bigger. They're sometimes bigger than a hummingbird. This one in particular, after searching through my insect books, I decided it's a white-lined sphinx moth. And they behave in a lot the same way that a hummingbird does. And they're quite a beautiful moth as well. And in this case, this one is getting nectar from a petunia. So think habitat is what my message, I guess, today is think habitat. This is my backyard. I took this picture today, and so you can see that things are just perfect here with no snow. But actually, this is from last summer, and in our yard here, as I say, we are in a transition period, moving the plants that we put in maybe 25 years ago that at the time I may have happily used the term ornamental. And so now that I think more in terms of habitat, we're switching plants over from the more introduced plants to the native plants. And even though 25 years ago, when we first landscaped this, we put in a lot of native plants at that time too. So it's not that they're as if there were none over the years, but there's going to be more. So the secret here to improving the habitat for the pollinators and for the birds and for beauty as well is to have lots of plants. So perennial shrubs, grasses, trees, various levels ground level, waist to head level, and trees, of course, too. So a key thing is that make sure that you've got plants that flower from spring to fall, and that will provide nectar and pollen for the pollinator insects. That they hold seeds that the birds can eat over the winter, and also berries that they can eat, that birds can eat in the winter, and that they provide shelter and nesting sites. So here's a bed for pollinators and butterfly larvae. And this is my almost entirely native bed. I converted this one 2 years ago. This was mostly tawny daylilies in here, and they still want to rear their heads now and then, but I dug most of them out, and I cut out one lilac and some burning bush, and replaced those plants with natives. So here you see what I call Heliopsis. It's the scientific name for what also people call false sunflower. That's another word that I'm trying to banish from the lexicon, is that native plants somehow get to be called false, or they get to be called weeds. And I think there's a bit of a bias there. But so this is a Heliopsis, or a false sunflower, the yellow one. And then I've got bee balm. There are, I don't think they're in flower there yet, but there's also Gaillardia, or blanket flower. And the big pinkish purple mauve one is what has become my favorite plant in the garden, and that's the giant hyssop. And these are all native plants, and but the giant hyssop is just phenomenal. It just teems with bees, mostly bumblebees from what I've seen. And interestingly, my honeybees, which are at the opposite end of the yard, they don't seem that interested in the native plants. They are more interested in well, the herbs and some of the introduced plants, and I guess that makes sense, since they co-evolve together. The honeybees are not native to this continent, and so wild bees, they like the wild, what we would call wild plants, the native plants, and honeybees, they like more the introduced plants. But that's it's a stretch to say that's always the case. The giant hyssop, the honeybees will also go for it, and they will go for other natives as well, looking for nectar and pollen. So inviting insects into the garden, and a lot of people, when I suggest this in talks, that people say, well, why would I? They get that look on their face. They say, well, really, why would I want to do that? They're just going to pester me when I'm out in the yard. And the reality is that very few insects actually are interested in you, and very few bite. And the mosquitoes tend to take the role of every insect, and people tend to think that all insects are going to bite, or that they're all wasps or hornets, and that have kind of a nasty temperament and will bother you. But in fact, the vast majority of insects, they don't care about you. They don't care about us. They don't care about the gardener. They're just going about their business daily. 90% of the Earth's flowering plants, including 35% of our fruit crops, are pollinated by insects. So that is a tremendous amount of food that we owe to our mostly bees. And so 90% of the flowering plants, that's on the planet. So without pollinators, there's not much left. Hummingbirds and bats. Bats don't get the credit they deserve, but they do a lot of pollinating as well, and they clean up a lot of evening and night insects for us that may pester us. Furthermore, animals that we eat, cattle, for example, they're plant eaters. So that's another way that we're dependent on the pollinators. They not only feed us directly, but they feed the animals that we then eat. Beneficial predators is a key term here that you'll certainly know more about by the time we're done this talk tonight. So beneficial predators eat pests, they keep the garden in balance. These are your allies. And you really want to be able to invite them and welcome them into the garden. And in most cases, you won't even know that they're there from a point of view of seeing them. You may or you may not see them. If you really look, you'll see them. But in most cases, they'll be there quietly doing their work. And it's good work that they're doing. So what a predator does is it will eat a pest. Pests are the herbivores, the ones that are going to eat your plants in your garden. And so the predators make a meal out of the pests while they're making a meal out of your tomatoes. Some examples are taconid flies, hoverflies, parasitic wasps, ground beetles, lacewings, dragonflies, ladybugs, spiders, and many more. That some of these are very popular and common, like dragonflies and ladybugs. Most people don't think about spiders as being a great ally in the garden, but they are. Taconid flies, I hadn't heard about them until a few years ago. Hoverflies, well, I just happen to have a picture. Parasitic wasps, don't think about wasps when you're about the paper wasps or hornets when you think about a parasitic wasp. Looks a bit more like an ant, like a flying ant, than it does the wasp, but I have pictures, so I don't have to describe. Hoverflies pollinate plants. An interesting factoid about hoverflies is that these little things, and you will have seen these if you've paid any attention looking at your flowers, there are many, many kinds of hoverflies, and we have them here, and they're one of the world's best pollinators. They're better than honeybees, apparently, and they may be second to the bumblebee when it comes to pollinating plants. They are a fly, so that just means that they've got 2 wings instead of 4. Bees have 4 wings, flies have 2. And notice the coloration here. Apparently, this is a technique or an evolutionary technique that insects like hoverflies that don't have much ability to defend themselves. They don't sting. But if you look like a big bad wasp, you're less likely to be attacked. So that's a protective device, I guess. So I read. So they, hoverflies pollinate plants. Their larvae eat aphids, especially aphids. They're well known for, but leafhoppers, cabbage worms, and many other pests. Extremely valuable. You've probably seen them. They're quite small. They're the ones that will hover just outside of a flower. And I guess that they're looking to see, well, what flower do I want to go into here? But they hover, they wings moving extremely fast, of course. Parasitic wasps pollinate plants. Their larvae eat aphids, tent caterpillars, hornworms, many other pests. And in previous talks that I've given, I've had photos as well of what parasitic wasps and parasitoid wasps actually do to caterpillars. And it's not pretty, and just due to space and time limitations, I didn't include the photo in here, but what you'll see is, for example, that hornworm that I showed you earlier, it would have a number of white eggs on its back. And it would mean that a parasitic or a parasitoid wasp had laid those eggs on the back of a caterpillar, and those eggs will eventually hatch, and they will start eating the caterpillar. And that caterpillar feeds those wasps, and you maybe get a dozen additional parasitic wasps that way. And of course, if they're parasitic wasps, they don't kill the caterpillar, but they do weaken them tremendously by eating their body parts. And if they're parasitoid, then they'll kill them. They'll eat their insides out. It's not pretty, but this is what we want to have more of in our gardens. Taconid flies pollinate plants, and their larvae eat cutworms, potato beetle larvae, it's a very important one, cucumber beetles, many other pests. The taconid flies, there are many varieties of taconid flies, and this is just one. They don't all look exactly like this. They are quite small. They are smaller than a housefly, and some of them have different colors on their bodies than this particular one. But again, they're an extremely, extremely valuable predator. You want them in your yard, and I'm going to tell you how to get them. The food garden. I'm going to talk about the food garden, including herbs, fruit, and vegetables. And then how do all these insects, how do they interact with your vegetable garden? Or how do all these beneficial insects interact with your vegetable garden? And well, that's why I'm starting with herbs here. And that flowering herbs are extremely valuable insectary plants. Most herbs are not native, although some are, of course. But the ones that seem to be really attractive to the beneficial predators are the herbs that are introduced. They're full of nectar. They have the type of flower that the insects really can get the nectar from quite easily, nectar and pollen. So easily grown herbs include those such as oregano, dill, mint, chives, coriander, thyme. They're commonplace here in the city. And all I'm suggesting here is that you may want to be a bit more thorough in letting these herbs grow around especially your vegetable garden. Strong scented herbs also deter pests. My examples there are basil, chives, marigold, sage, and many others. So this is a corner of my own garden here, and there's a lot of different things growing in a very tight space. And I don't include in this presentation a picture of my entire vegetable garden that it looks almost like this as well. And some people would say that it's quite messy. But what we've got here are a number of herbs. This is at one corner. And so I've got coriander, there's dill, there's basil, there's parsley. There's also the odd bachelor button flower in there. And the big job that we have throughout the growing season is we remove herbs rather than add them, and rather than struggle with trying to let them grow. They seed themselves out. We let them seed themselves out every year, and they come back again the year after. It's just a matter then of us thinning them out. And of course, we also use these in our food. So multiple benefits. But these are plants that anybody can grow, and they will certainly bring in those beneficial insects that you want in your garden. Growing fruit. Regina has a pretty good climate for growing fruit, believe it or not. And so my list there: apples, saskatoons, cherries, haskellats, raspberries, strawberries, chokecherries, currants, and cranberries are fairly common and fairly easy to grow. Um, I look at fruit trees and fruit shrubs as serving multiple functions, and that includes for um, uh, habitat. It's for food for us, of course, but it provides nectar and pollen. Butterfly larvae will live on Saskatoons, for example, and on chokecherries, and provides nesting sites for birds and shelter and food for birds throughout the winter. And what I have almost always done is planted the fruit, except in certain situations, planted it, used it as call it an ornamental or a habitat shrub, and it's because they're beautiful. They like Saskatoons, they're beautiful from start to finish, in my opinion. They have the flowers quite early on, flowers that are very important to the pollinators. They have the fruit that's delicious, and in the fall, they're some of the most beautiful plants that we have when they turn color. So things like Saskatoons or high bush cranberries, they can be planted around the yard, and I would recommend they be planted in various places around the yard. And fruit like raspberries and strawberries, though, should probably have their own bed. Both of them have the need to move, and so you need to have space for them to move. And raspberries, I've butted them up against our back lawn, and so they can move out that direction, and it gives me the incentive every 3 or so years to dig up more lawn and let the raspberries expand out into the lawn. And fresh raspberries, and it just happens to be one of my favorite fruits, so I couldn't resist including a picture of it here in February of freshly picked raspberries that from our own patch. And here's a picture that I got last summer, which is an odd time to see a Bohemian waxwing in the yard. At least I haven't seen them there before. They're more likely to show up in the wintertime when there's still apples on our apple tree up at the top, the ones we couldn't reach, and the waxwings will, a big group of them will arrive, and they'll happily peck away at the apples. Usually that happens this time of year or further closer to spring. So in this case, I don't know what it was with this particular bird, but I could have touched him. And all he did was look at me here, probably a he. And so it was July last summer, and it was too late for berries. The haskellapes were done. Haskellapes were one of the first berries out, and but he was probably there for an insect meal. And I don't know. He's got better eyes to find the insects than I do, and hopefully he found some. But it was a bit odd that he was so unafraid of me. And I actually thought that he's maybe a little bit stunned. I didn't see any other waxwings around, so I don't know what the story was there. And here's some of our cranberry bushes. So this is in spring. Cranberries are also a very valuable native. They, like Saskatoons, they provide value all year round. And they're very hardy, of course. They like a little bit more water than, say, Saskatoons do, but they do adapt quite well to whatever rainfall we happen to get. That's not something I go out of my way to water the cranberries. So they pretty much look after themselves. They again, they have flowers, beautiful flowers. They're host for insect larvae, butterfly larvae. And they have berries, and those berries hold on, and people can eat them. I don't. They're quite acidic and not very tasty. You can make jam out of them, syrups and that sort of thing, but mostly they just stay on the bush, and the birds eat them throughout the winter. So it serves multiple purposes. Saskatoons in their fall clothing. This is a bush that happens to be mostly yellow, but there's some of them have more pinks and reds in the fall, and they're just a beautiful addition to the landscape. And for all reasons, they serve multiple purposes. And that's one of the themes of the planting that I'm trying to do now is it's plantings that serve multiple purposes. And whether that's feeding butterfly larvae, feeding birds, feeding humans, is it for beauty? Is it for shelter? The more of those boxes you can tick off, the better. And so that's what I work towards doing. The vegetable garden. Now, this is your problem child generally in the garden, I think, because they demand more attention. They're mostly non-native annuals. So the vegetable garden is kind of a special place. The rest of the yard, once you've planted it, and if you've got decent soil and done intelligent plantings, it can look after itself mostly. But once it gets to the vegetable garden, it's quite intensive, the work you're going to have to do, as I'm sure most of you know. So it's mostly non-native annuals, and as such, they're more susceptible to pests and diseases than the plants in the rest of your yard. The gardener's mantra should be, in my world, is that healthy soil makes healthy plants and healthy food. And I will explain a couple slides from now, I guess, why that might be, that healthy soil makes for healthy food. The gardener's law of return. What is removed from the soil must be returned. And that is an absolute must. You must return what you've taken from the soil. In the vegetable garden, you're taking a crop off every year. That's all kinds of nutrients have been removed from the soil. They're not going to be there for next year. So you've got to do something about that. Otherwise, your soil is going to progressively get poorer as time goes along. And you'll wonder why your plants are not growing very well, why they're susceptible to insect and disease attack. And the reason is that the soil is not good enough. So the law of return. So I use compost, alfalfa pellets, and liquid fish fertilizers. They're perfect in my opinion. So compost, I add. I've got compost bins on the go all the time, and it's generally in the fall. It's time that I empty out one of my big bins onto the vegetable garden. And you don't need that much. It's only maybe maximum 2 inches spread all over the vegetable garden. And then I mix in some alfalfa pellets as well. I don't use liquid fish fertilizer at that point. I just use that during the growing season in case a plant looks like it's lacking something. And if it looks like it needs a boost, then I'll give it a shot of liquid fish fertilizer. And that's all you need for fertilizers. You certainly, these are much more complete fertilizers. They have the micronutrients and the macronutrients that the plants need. And that's unlike the chemical fertilizers, the synthetic fertilizers that are front of the shelf in so many garden centers, that they're really not feeding the soil. They're not, they don't contain the micronutrients that are absolutely essential if you're going to have healthy plants. And in the vegetable garden, try to incorporate those insectary plants. So those are the flowering herbs that will bring in the beneficial insects, and they'll be your pest control. When it comes to pest control, though, if it looks like your predators can't keep up and you're getting too many slugs, for example, or you think there's too many caterpillars on your cabbage or wherever, there's nothing wrong with taking them off by hand. The potato beetles in all of our time in this yard, which is about 25 years, and in this vegetable garden, we had potato beetles once. And what we did was we picked them all off and squished them. And that was the end of it. Haven't seen any since. So I'm assuming that we didn't get them all and that we have friendly insects that are doing the job for us when it comes to the potato beetles, because I know that they are around in other gardens. Healthy soil is alive. And that's literally alive. So in this double handful of soil here, there's actually billions of microbes, meaning bacteria and fungi. And the fungal threads are, there would be probably, there are many, many meters of fungal threads throughout this little handful of soil. And I've seen bigger numbers than that, but it's just hard to imagine. So if I say there's many meters, even that seems outrageous. But those are living creatures in your soil, and they are what cycle the plant material and dead insect bodies and other microbes through their bodies, and they turn whatever they eat into a poop that is very fertile and the plants can use as their nutrition. So that's the key to having a healthy garden, is what you see in my hands there. And I've been adding compost for forever to the garden. And it's pretty darn good soil now, and I can easily get into the soil with my bare hand and scoop soil out that way. I don't really need a shovel. So microbes add nutrients. They not only add nutrients, but they also do disease protection. And so healthy soil makes healthy plants, makes healthy food, makes healthy people. This is, I was in Quebec City a couple of years ago in June, and walking around their National Assembly buildings. So there's beautifully landscaped there. And what they'd done is they'd taken out a big section of lawn in front of the National Assembly there and put in organic vegetable gardens, which I thought was pretty neat, pretty nice thing to do. And these are very neat, very orderly, and way more orderly than what my mind can imagine, really. So, but the plants look very healthy. And in Quebec City, they've got a lot of things are organic. There's certainly, they've got a ban on the use of pesticides within the city, and as many of the large cities in Canada do now and have had for a number of years, whereas Regina, for example, does not. So that's a beautiful vegetable garden, nice to look at. I'm sure it grows very nice vegetables. It's one way to do an organic plot. And it doesn't show up here, but right nearby, especially along the building and in other beds, there are all kinds of perennial plants that would, I'm sure, are full of pollinators. So that they'll make their way, no doubt, over to this vegetable garden and do whatever work they need to do there as well. And here's another style. This would be my style. And it's more of massing plants. And this is fairly early on. This would be in June, I would think, or mid to late June, looks at the size of the plants. And the lack of herbs showing up there. At the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, there's yarrow, which I have a big mass of yarrow growing alongside the vegetable garden. That's a great plant for pollinators and for beneficial insects. Really brings them in. So this is pre the herbs getting into their flowering stage, but we let the herbs grow up in between the tomatoes there, the potatoes, the lettuce, everything else. And so it starts to look a little messy. And so what we have to do is clean out some of those herbs. Well, it's easy to clean them out if we need them for the kitchen. And sometimes we just have to pull them because they do very well in there. And I've got a strawberry patch there on the left-hand side, and it wasn't doing much at this point, I can see. And there's a wire fence around that. And I also have a lid for the whole bed that is small page wire as well. And the purpose of that, of course, is to keep the birds out. They won't let you have any strawberries if you don't protect them in some way. And so that's how I do it there. When it comes to things like the raspberries, we just grow so many raspberries that the birds, what they get, they're welcome to, because they leave more than enough for us. And so other things like the Saskatoons that I planted over 20 years ago, it's rare that we get a berry. The birds get there first, and we grow cherries as well, and we get a few cherries, but the birds they're not as fussy as we are. They don't wait until they're perfectly ripe, and they'll go after them. And what I've tried doing before is putting a cloth mesh around them, and it does work to a certain extent, except there's always a robin gets in there and then gets tangled, and you've got to go free the robin pretty much every day. So I don't particularly like that kind of protection. And so I just decided that I guess they get to have the cherries and they get to have the Saskatoons. The Haskap's, they have very flimsy limbs, and I think it's especially early on in the spring when the berries are on the bush. The birds don't seem to take a lot of them, even though I'm sure they'd like to, but I don't think they can stand on the limbs all that easily. That's my observation anyway. So some different planting styles there. The straight row, the very clean spaces in between your rows of vegetables, that's perfectly okay. I think you can use your space better, and that's by sort of massing your plants together, and rather than the long rows where you have space in between that you can walk down. And it's never a good idea to walk on your vegetable garden. And what I have here are some planks in a couple of locations, and we walk down those, and we can reach in and pull any weeds that happen to come up, or we can harvest from the planks rather than having to step on the soil, which just leads to compaction and poorer growth habitat. So this is so late September. These are on the right-hand side there, those are, the pink are cosmos and the yellow are Heliopsis, the false sunflower. And on the left-hand side, it was our tomato bed. And we mixed tomatoes in with herbs like basil and parsley and chili peppers and things like that. And so we grew that on the left-hand side. And then I planted the garlic there. That's what's under the wire cage to keep it away from the squirrels that inevitably, if you've planted something, they want to come and plant their peanut that they've gotten from the neighbors. So my point of this particular picture is to show, for one thing, this is late September. And so I don't cut the flowers down. These cosmos are known as one of the great pollinator plants. And Heliopsis are great pollinator plants and habitat plants as well. So we leave them up, and they stay up all winter. And in fact, all of our perennials will stay up all winter. And it'll be in the springtime that we'll cut them down. But the reason for leaving them up in the winter is multiple reasons, but they'll have seeds the birds can eat throughout the winter. It helps collect the snow protects the soil, and I've got more energy in the spring anyway, so I'm more enthusiastic to go out and cut down all the plants. Often I'll just leave the plant material at the base of the plants, or I'll cut the seeds off and put them in the compost bin. My compost, sometimes I put seeds in there, and sometimes they make it through and they start growing in the vegetable garden. But properly managed compost, and I have to say that some years I properly manage it and some years I don't. And properly managed will burn up the seeds. They'll eat up the seeds in the composting process. But anyway, so that's what I do with the perennials. They stay up all winter. The vegetable side is a different story. And what I do is I cut all of the stems off at ground level. I leave the roots in the ground, and because that's going to be organic matter. It's not as if these things are going to sprout again. The tomatoes are not going to sprout, but I just cut them off at ground level, leave the roots in the soil, and then I start adding my 2 inches of compost over it all. Then I mix in some alfalfa pellets, and then I mulch it all with the leaf mold that I've been collecting over the last few years, or just ordinary leaves if I don't have any leaf mold. And so that soil has been refed. It's going to have the nutrients again next year that the plants took out this year, and it's going to be protected by that leaf mulch as well over the winter until the snow arrives, in which case then the snow protects it. You'll see there on the middle of the fence, the very near the middle left of the screen, I've got a bee tube, and that's for wild bees. They can make their nests in there if they like to, if they would like to. And I don't keep a really close track on that, but I know that bees have laid their eggs in there when each of the holes is sealed over. There's about a dozen holes in there, or 10 holes, not sure. And when they're sealed over, I know that they've laid their eggs in there. They've sealed it over, and the adult is left, but the eggs are inside there. They'll hatch. The mother has left pollen and nectar in there for the hatched bees, the larvae, to eat. And once they've eaten enough, they'll chew their way out and eventually become adult bees. So my last slide here is really a summary of what I've talked about here. Creating habitat is essential. And there's multiple reasons that we would want to create habitat. We can sort of revive nature within the city here, I think. I'm just amazed at the number of bumblebees that I've noticed, especially this last year in our yard. People have asked me, do the honeybees and the native bees, do they crowd each other? Do the honeybees crowd the native bees out? And I haven't seen that happen. Like I said earlier, I noticed that the native bees tend to like the native plants. The honeybees tend to like the introduced plants. The native bees, though, will also go for the introduced plants. They like the nectar and the pollen that they can get from them as well. And honeybees will occasionally go for the native plants as well. So I don't see them fighting. I think the key is to create as much habitat as possible. And I think that we could certainly do that across Regina. You don't have to tear up your entire yard all at once, but just slowly start adding some native plants and a variety of native plants. And think about having flowering plants spring through fall. So different plants, a good diversity of plants. So that's creating habitat. You want butterflies, then they're going to have to come from caterpillars, and caterpillars are going to have to be able to eat something. And that's going to be some of your native plants. They won't, in most cases, they will not destroy the whole plant by any means. And caterpillars, of course, also food for birds. And bird numbers are also declining. They need more caterpillars. They need this kind of habitat. And we can do it in the city. Keep in mind that most insects are beneficial. Do not let that hornet and the mosquito be representative of all insects in your minds. Most are beneficial. You want them. Birds eat caterpillars and adult insects, as do bats. Bats are incredibly important, both as pollinators and as insect or pest control. Birds eat berries, so you're going to have to protect that valuable fruit. You're going to have to make the decision, how do I want to protect this particular fruit? Because when we first landscaped this yard 25 years ago, we were thinking, well, there's no birds here. What can we do to get birds? And well, that's what we did, was we planted a lot of fruit. And because, of course, birds like berries. So it means that we get less fruit, but we got lots of birds now. Should always have water available for birds and for the insects. The insects have to drink as well. And on the hot days, I notice that especially our honeybees, they're all over the bird bath. And so I put some stones in there to make sure that they don't drown, because they don't swim well. But there's sometimes they don't get along with the birds all that well, or the birds will back away if they see quite a number of bees are drinking. But anyway, that's an easy problem to solve. It's a good problem to have. Remember the healthy soil, the mantra, healthy soil grows healthy food. Put compost on annually. You don't have to be doing it weekly or monthly. Just annually would be good. And take care of that. Vegetable garden soil especially. If you've got compost left over from the vegetable garden, when you're finished the vegetable garden, by all means, put it around the fruit trees. I certainly put it in the raspberry bed, and I put it in the strawberry bed. And it doesn't usually go that much further, but if I do have more left over, then I'll sprinkle it in amongst the perennial beds too. And accept some insect damage. And this is where maybe the biggest mind shift needs to take place, is that because a leaf has been chewed, it does not mean the plant will die, of course. And but I do have a number of people that call me up about having a particular insect or a particular look to a leaf, and they think that the whole plant is going to die. And they want to know what they can do to kill whatever it is that's causing the problem. And so I always get people, either I go and look at it or I get them to send me a picture. And in most cases, it's not much of a problem, and it will take care of itself. If you've got healthy plants, they can take a little bit of chewing from insects, and they can fight off disease as well. So it's very seldom that you need to take any action, but sometimes you've got to remove. You can hand remove them, fine. Take a caterpillar off. You've got too many caterpillars, take some off. If there's too many aphids on, say, one of our honeysuckle vines, and they're prone to that, then I'll just take my finger and slide it up and down the stem, and that'll squish all kinds of aphids, but it doesn't kill the predators. And there will still leave some aphids for the predators to eat. And so the predators will stay around, and they'll help in the control. I think that's it. So I would take any questions if anyone has any. I think I went a bit longer than true to form. I always go a bit over time.
So if people want to use the raised hand option, I can kind of moderate the question period as well. Or you can just ask a question. I'll start. So for kind of troublesome plants that are a little bit invasive, like creeping bellflower, are there certain native plants you can help suggest to outcompete them?
No, creeping bellflower is a special case. It's a monster, really. And of course, it's not a native plant. It will reproduce itself by almost any means. You leave a little bit of a rhizome in the ground and it'll sprout. Its seeds explode and it goes for a great distance. And it seems like there's no stopping them. What I do is make life difficult for them. And I try to pick out as much of it as I can possibly get. Like we have one spot between our house and the neighbors, and there's nothing else really planted there. And so the bellflower has come up. And so I pull it, and then when it comes up again, I cut it down at ground level. And so that's just making life difficult for it, and it's not allowing it to go to seed. I know they have nice flowers. There are some very nice bellflowers, and there's nothing wrong with those bellflowers. Harebells, the native harebells, is a relative of the bellflower. So they can be beautiful plants, but this particular one, the creeping bellflower, is a monster. What I have noticed in our own yard is that we have some another ground cover, and it's slipping my mind right now what it is. Dead nettle, which is quite an attractive variegated plant. It's green and white, and it has a pink flower, and pollinators seem to like it. It's not native, but it has, we've let it go in a few places in the yard, and it seems to be able to outcompete the bellflower. And it's much easier to pull out if you think it's getting out of hand. So that's about the only options that there are, I think, for bellflower. And I've read about people that try spraying it too, and they find that doesn't really work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I've got a question, Phil. You talked about leaf mold. So as opposed to leaf litter, what's the difference between the two?
Well, leaf mold is sort of an old term, I think, and that's what they called when you let things compost. They would call it mold, but the name is stuck. And all it is that get a pile of leaves. In the fall is a good time where there are lots of leaves available. Find a nice spot in your yard where you can pile them up. And I like to wet them down when I'm piling them up so that there's moisture inside of them, because some of the leaves that are picked in the fall, raked in the fall, are very dry. And I pile them up and let them sit. And the reason why you have to pick a really good spot for it is because it takes about 3 years for you to get good leaf mold. But it's an exceptional soil amendment once it's done, and it's the composting process, but it's just leaves, and so it's really good stuff for to use as mulch, or you can mix it into the soil. I put it in some of our planting pots as well to mix in with the soil, so it's as an organic matter. I wouldn't say that there's a whole lot of or a wide range of nutrients in leaf mold, but it's just a really good soil conditioner.
And does it have to be in a warm spot then?
No, it doesn't matter where it is. No,
Okay.
Now I just put it in a place where it's not, gonna make the neighbors mad.
I don't have a lot of fussy neighbors, so
Okay.
thanks.
Yeah.
Phil, I'm just going to ask, do you have suggestions for native plants for people?
Oh yeah, I've got lots of suggestions for native plants, and you know, I think I said my favorite is the anise hyssop or giant hyssop, and I just think it's a beautiful plant. It is so trouble-free. Although I did find in one of the gardens that I've been working on that a gopher ate it. But otherwise, in most cases, the giant hyssop is a superb plant. It just has everything going for it, and you know, and it's beautiful. And it just requires a little care. But that's the way it is with a lot of the natives, is that they don't require that much care. It can happen that they become a little rambunctious and they want to spread. So that means that you've got extra plants, and then you can move them around to another bed. But I do like bee balm. Heliopsis, the fall sunflower, you know, it's all over Regina here, and but it's beautiful, and it has multiple functions. Oh, well, you know, the list is so long. I don't really, I don't know where to start. I'd be happy to put together a list that could go on your website. You know, one of my favorites, and is Joe Pye weed, which I just call Joe Pye. So of course it's a native, and it's one of our biggest perennials. And it likes a little bit more moisture than most of the other native plants. And in our yard, it's grown to be about 4.5 feet tall and very wide. It has this beautiful deep pink flowers on it. And it's, of course, always going to be covered with bees and butterflies and things like that. So it's also one of my favorites. And the only reason that well, I would say everybody should have one. If you've got a spot where in the hot weather, you can give it a bit of water. So that's a favorite for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a long list, but you know, I prefer to be a bit more methodical about putting them together. They probably need to be grouped a bit. Based on what kind of moisture and soil conditions they like, and light conditions. Like asters, of course, are, you know, they're beautiful, and they give you that late fall. I think it was well into October that our asters were still blooming last year. Goldenrod, anemones, Canada anemones. As far as and I think grasses are very important. They're often overlooked. And we have, of course, we're in the middle of the grasslands here, and they do very well here. And the grass that you see in most ornamental situations is the Carl Forster feather reed grass. It's not a native. It's a beautiful grass, no question about it. It's beautiful, but it's not a native. And we have native grasses that are just as beautiful. And so big blue stem and little blue stem, Indian grass, prairie dropseed. Those are a few, but you're starting to get to be able to find them now in the garden centers too. You know, I've got a Plant Ranch on the west side of the city. They had quite a lot of prairie dropseed last year. And they seem to switch their grasses from year to year. But there are a number of garden centers also on the prairies here that specialize in native plants. And now is the time to be ordering.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have any more questions for Phil?
Doesn't look like it, but thank you very much, Phil. That was really interesting, and I'm busy scribbling things down here. And I was interested about the bluebell, the creeping bellflower, because I've discovered the only thing to get rid of it is to dig it out. And you do have really nice soil wherever you're trying to dig it out, because
Yeah,
you
that's
have
true.
to keep working it. But yeah,
And
I
then
never.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just have to keep working at it. But I do pull when I have had it in the yard, I would pull it as soon as it finished blooming, though, to try to stop the seeds from going everywhere. But you're right, with the rhizomes and stuff, and I'm pretty sure my neighbors have a little bit of mine now too. So
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. I hope people were able to participate in the Great Backyard Bird Count over the last 4 days. I know I did. I was really excited. I had white-winged crossbills, a pair of them in my front yard, that I could actually, at a time when I was actually counting, that I could record for, I don't know, I guess I can record them anytime, but it seems more exciting when somebody else is particularly watching it. Shannon, did you have anything that you wanted to tell us about Get Outside, or the new Get Outside Explorer, or what's happening these days?
I can see some of, hi guys, I'm Shannon Chernick. I'm on contract with Nature Regina, and I can see some names of people that have come to some of the events, like on the call, so that's awesome. I'm glad you found out about the other stuff that we do as an organization. I'll just say quickly, the City of Regina partnered with Nature Regina this week to offer events all week because it's the February break. So if you're looking for an outdoor adventure, it is going to warm up on Wednesday. I promise, apparently. Mother Nature is going to start cooperating. And we're going to be offering nature walks every day from Wednesday to Sunday. And they're being led by Jordan Rusted, who is a field biologist. And you can join in either on snowshoe or on foot, whatever your comfort levels at. So those are running, and we also have a free event happening on Saturday in Les Sherman Park. So if you're interested in the events, just if you go to the natureregina.ca/events page, you can register for those. And a shout out to Darylyn, who continues to post all of these events, and to Jim for sending them out through MailChimp, and Ingrid for promoting stuff on Facebook. They're our volunteer communications team, and they go above and beyond with keeping everyone notified about what's going on. So yeah, there's lots of events happening this week if you want to get outside. So that's it. That's all I'll say.
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, people have been trapped in the house far too long with this cold weather, so yeah, check them out. I've done a couple myself, and they're really fun. Next month, we will have Susan Bone is going to come. I think I'm saying that right. She's from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Society of Saskatchewan, and I know last year, or maybe it was even the year before, we tried to have someone come out from the Wildlife Rehab Society, and for one reason or another they weren't able to make it. So next month, that's who our speaker will be. Thank you very much for your patience, everyone. Once we get going, we always have a great meeting, and I'm really happy that everybody showed up. And unless there's any questions or comments, I'll just say good night, and thanks again, Phil.
Okay, thank you. Bye.